And good evening, Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Welcome to another episode of Steelers Friday Night Six Pack. I'm your host, as always, Tony Defio. And I thank you, as always, for joining me on this humid Friday night in Pittsburgh. That is, if you're joining me live on YouTube or Facebook, where you can catch many live shows, including this one, The Hangover, The Scobro Show, The Preview, the Touchdown Under, Know Your Enemy, and we'll have a few more for you as the Tales from 2 a.m., although I think that's going away during the season. I'm not sure. But there'll be a bunch of live stuff every Sunday during game day. So please check us out live on YouTube and Facebook. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our YouTube channel. It helps us out. It helps us grow our podcasting platform, and boy, has it grown in the last year or so since Jeff Hartman, Dave Schofield, Michael Beck, and the podcasting manager Brian Anthony Davis, since they all got together and just started brainstorming and how to bring you the best and most Steelers content out there. And I think that's what they're doing a good job of. So please check all those out, and you can check those shows out on audio platforms after the fact, on any audio platform that you choose. Anywhere you want to find a podcast, you can find our stuff. We have those shows, and we also have audio-only shows, such as the Live Mic, Let's Ride, the Stat Geek, the Curtain Call. Jeffrey Benedict has a show coming out soon. If I missed any, I'm sure there's more. I always say that. Yeah, there's plenty. We have so many shows, so please check them out. And check out Behind the Steel Curtain, the website. We're bringing you news, commentary, film breakdown, all the coverage in the world you're ever going to need on game day. And speaking of game day, Thursday night, the Steelers defeated the Cowboys 16-3 in the annual Hall of Fame game, a game that was supposed to take place in 2020, but it had to be put on hold, as all of the preseason was last year, due to the pandemic. But it was nice to see some football last night and before a packed crowd. So we're going to be talking about that. And before I get to that, I want to welcome everybody to the live chat, as I normally do. Sean Manahan, George Teston, Stacy Lynn, Jared Devil, Brian Brown, Steeler Chick 46, who was the first one here. I think that was the second week in a row. I could be wrong, but let's see who else. Mark Davison. Good day, mates, he says. He's the legendary Mark Davison. Cree X. Danny Owens, Steelers Pittsburgh. So welcome, everybody. And I hope to have a fun and informative show for you this Friday. So let's talk about that game, the 16-3 victory over the Cowboys, the preseason opener, the lid lifter. And my opinion on the game was that was your typical preseason game. I mean, it didn't really blow me away as far as the performances, but these games hardly ever do. I kind of joked on Twitter on Thursday towards the end of the game that if they were making a fictional preseason game for some movie or TV show, the final score would be 16-3, because that would be true to life, because that's what these scores almost always are. I'm pretty sure that I should have researched this, but I have a pretty decent memory. The last time Pittsburgh played in the Hall of Fame game back in 2015, the game that Sean Sweesom, his career ended with a torn ACL, by the way. I think that game was 14-3, if I'm not mistaken. So, preseason is rarely pretty, and you really get, in the last night's game, Thursday night's game was no exception. And it was the play was kind of sloppy, but it wasn't sloppy in terms of penalties, just mainly in terms of performance. And that's understandable. You had very few starters on both sides of the ball in the game for either team. And you had players obviously shuttling in and out all four quarters. So it's hard to really get rhythm and cohesion and anything. And as you know, there's no game plan on offense or defense in most preseason games, except for maybe the dress rehearsal. And even that, there really isn't a whole heck of a lot anymore. So, you just have to basically watch individual performances and base things off of that as much as you can. Even then, you have to kind of take a lot of that stuff with a grain of salt. But I was pleased with some of the individual performances, and not so pleased with others. But again, it's not something I'm gonna base a final decision on about any of these guys. It's too early, And I thought Naji Harris looked pretty good in his debut, his professional football debut. 7 carries for 22 yards. Not really productive, but he ran tough. He ran hard. He moved the pile. I was actually out watching the game, and I was showing some friends the one famous run that he had. I guess maybe it was his first carry or second carry, or it was a first down carry. I think it was for 6 yards, and he pushed the pile, and that was pretty cool to see, because that was one thing that they were missing last year is the ability to do such things on running plays. It seemed like they were more passive than they were aggressive on running plays in 2020, and that was a big part of why their offense kind of faltered down the stretch, and it became mostly a short passing offense by the end of last year. So it was nice to see, and I'm not going to lie, when it came to Naji, I was looking forward to his debut for months. I just couldn't wait to see this guy in action. I don't know what happened. The closer we got to the game, we got to Thursday night's kickoff, the more hesitant I got for him to even play, even though, obviously I'm not paying his salary or anything, but as a fan, I didn't want to see him get hurt, because I think and I'm not the first person to say this, but I think he might be the most important draft pick for their offense, at least in terms of offense, since maybe Marquise Pouncey came along in 2010. I think he's really that important. He could be that important for them this year, and I think he's head and shoulders above any running back that they have. And I think they have big plans for him as far as being a 3-down running back mostly in their offense. So I think he has they have big plans for him. So I was kind of hesitant, but he's a rookie, and you can't let a rookie sit out for 4 preseason games or 3 or whatever you play from moving forward. So he has to get action. He has to get touches. He has to get a feel for what it's like to play in a professional setting, as Mike Tomlin said in a press conference prior to Thursday's game. So it was nice to see him get some work in. And again, it wasn't anything, that you're going to remember ever. It was just an ordinary rookie debut, but it was nice to see him out there, and it was nice to see him running tough. So, and it was also more than anything else, it was nice to see him getting through the game unscathed and unscathed in terms of injury. So, welcome to the NFL, Naji Harris. And before I continue, I just want to welcome some more people into the live chat. Shane Giggles, that's quite the name. Felix, thanks, Mean Joe, Felicia Ballard, one of our legends, our regulars. So welcome, Team Money, my man Terry. I was hanging out with Terry again Thursday night. We were watching the game off and on while at Walters in Lawrenceville. So welcome to Terry. Thomas Arbuckle. So welcome to all the new folks. Let's see. Moving forward, continuing on with Thursday's game. As far as the quarterback play, all 3 quarterbacks, I know a lot of people had hard opinions on these guys on social media and on Sports Talk Radio and wherever else after the game, but I don't think anyone did anything to separate themselves from the pack. Mason Rudolph, I think he looked a lot better, or a little bit better than people were giving him credit for, but I think so many people have made up their minds on him as far as what he can be for them, even as a backup quarterback, that he's kind of regressed into Landry Jones territory, at least when you're talking about public opinion. So, but I think he looked okay. 6-9 for 84 yards. He had the long gainer to Chase Claypool, which was a great catch by Claypool to stretch out and hold on. And he got hurt on that play a little bit, but he was okay. But, he did drop a pass earlier in the game that, who knows, it might have made Rudolph's numbers look way better than they actually even were. And, he had a pretty decent passer rating. I think it was 90 plus. So it wasn't a bad game for him. He had to fumble on the attempted jet sweep. I don't know whose fault that really was, but, he has to do a better job of taking care of the football because he used the quarterbacks. But I think he was pretty good. Not great, but not awful either. Not as awful as people thought he was. But if you're on Team Mason, you're going to take everything that he does and blow it up. And if you're anti-Team Mason, then you're going to take everything he does in the preseason and tear it down. That's just the nature of the fans. And speaking of which, I know a lot of people were super excited to see Dwayne Haskins, and I was too. And he looked okay. Was he 8 for 13, 54 yards? But it was mostly just checkdowns. He didn't really do a lot to show off his arm, that perfect throwing motion that Roethlisberger talked about, and the ability to throw it through a car wash without getting it wet. Remember that famous quote back in the summer, or it's still the summer, earlier in the summer. But, he didn't do anything to hurt his cause either. He wasn't great, but he wasn't horrible. He was just middle of the road. Josh Dobbs looked okay in his limited playing time. He threw that touchdown pass to Tyler Simmons late in the game, and I thought that was the best pass of the game by any quarterback on either team. He stood in and he stared down a blitzer who was coming in untouched, and he held his own, or held his ground, and actually threw a perfect out pass. It was a perfect pass, considering he was about to get leveled, and I thought he looked good, but it was only one pass, and he didn't really do a whole heck of a lot other than that to make anybody sit up and take notice. So it was a kind of a night where all three quarterbacks kind of held serve as far as their stock, I think, in my opinion. Obviously, it's my opinion. I'm saying it, so who else's opinion would it be? But I don't. If you're gonna determine anything based on what happened on Thursday about any of those guys, I think it's based solely on your preconceived notions about them. So, and it's easy to see why backup quarterbacks have a hard time really doing anything spectacular in a preseason, because first of all, they're playing with very few starters, whether you're talking about all pros or just regular old starters. How many play with these guys in the preseason, these backups? Last night, first of all, the line was completely new to begin with as far as starters, essentially. If you're talking about moving Shooks over from right tackle to left tackle, and Kevin Dotson, he did play some last year. Actually played a lot, but he's still a new starter. So you basically have a new starting offensive line, and if you consider Kendrick Green to be the starter, the rookie from Illinois, he's still new. But even if you consider him as your starter, you still had four backups in there for the new starters. You had Dan Moore playing left tackle, which I thought he did okay. The fourth round pick from Texas A&M. I kind of tried to watch him as much as I could because I'm fascinated by him for some reason. There's something about that guy that just fascinates me. Maybe it's the success that Dotson had last year as a fourth round pick. Maybe that's why I'm kind of invested in him. But it was nice to see him get to start and play the arguably the most difficult, or at least most important position on the line, protecting the quarterback's blind side as a left tackle. So it was a new line, and Juju didn't play. Obviously Ebron didn't play. Even Freiermuth was out. So, and yeah, he had Claypool in there, and Claypool, I think he's going to be a stud, but still you're limited as far as your starters. And that's just Mason Rudolph. The other guys, Haskins and Dobbs, they had, as far as I can remember, all reserves were in there by the time they got in. So you're judging these guys based on that. Or you have to factor it. You have to factor that in, I should say, when you're judging these guys, and you have to factor in the fact that there's no real game plan in the preseason. They're not. When you're talking about a game plan for an offensive coordinator, for example, it's not just about calling specific plays. It's about calling plays based on what you think will work against what a defense is doing as far as their formation, their weak spots, their weak links, and you're building one play off of another. You're trying to find a rhythm. You're trying to find cohesion, and you really don't get a whole lot of that when it comes to preseason football. It's mainly about what the coaches want to see as far as individual players, not so much as what they want to see as far as what could work to beat an opposing defense. So it's hard to really judge backup quarterbacks in a preseason game, but you have to. And I don't know if any of these guys are going to really stand out over these next 3 games, but it's going to be interesting to see if one does, and if he does stand out, whether it's Rudolph or Haskins or even Dobbs, if that factors into the coach's decision as far as who's going to be the backup in 2021, who's going to get cut. I think we all assume Rudolph's going to make the team, but is he going to make the team and be the third stringer? Or is he going to make the team and be the backup? Or is Haskins going to take his job and be the back and be the number 2 based on performance and pedigree? Because we have to factor that in. He's a first round pick. That means a lot, especially early in a player's career. Coaches might say, they don't evaluate these guys. They don't weigh in their draft status, but come on, that they do. I mean, first round picks get more chances than undrafted free agents for a reason. So to sum that up, I don't think any of the quarterbacks were great or horrible. They were just in between. So as far as the defense, to echo the sentiments of many, the inside linebackers looked pretty bad, with the exception of Buddy Johnson, the rookie 4th-round pick from Texas A&M, especially in pass coverage. I'm talking about the ones who didn't show out. Robert Spillane, UG3, Marcus Allen. But you have to remember, there's a reason why the defense looked suspect after Ryan Shazier got hurt. And there's a reason why they were so aggressive 2 years ago in trading up and drafting Devin Bush in the top with the 10th pick of the 2019 NFL draft. And that's because an inside linebacker of that caliber makes such a big difference for a defense, especially in the middle of the field. They do so much of the heavy lifting. And, when you're talking about decent sort of underdog players, the lunch pail type players, which is like what a Robert Spillane represents, that blue collar guy. I'm actually reading Bill Cowher's book right now as throughout the week. I've been reading it. It's a really, really good book, by the way. And he was that kind of player. He was like a Robert Spillane kind of player, undrafted free agent. And he had to basically, absorb the playbook and rely on his instincts to try to, make up for his lack of overall natural talent. So, but Bill Cowher was never going to be the best linebacker on his team. He might have been the most versatile. He could play all the positions, but he was never going to be the best one. So when you're talking about a team defense, if you're in there, and Robert Spillane and Allen and those guys, they were in there without, Minka Fitzpatrick, obviously TJ Watt, arguably the best defensive player in the NFL right now. Cam Hayward, I don't think Tua played. He didn't play, did he? So, you're without all those players that would pick up a lot of, especially Devin Bush in the middle of the field, that would pick up a lot of the slack and do a lot of the heavy lifting. And if you're one of those kind of blue collar lunch pill defenders, you can just excel at what you do best. Like we saw for many years with Vince Williams, he was so much better when he was alongside a Shazier or even a Timmons, because those guys were so athletic, and they allowed a thumper like Williams to do his thing, which was, playing the run and the last few years getting after the quarterback. So, it's hard to evaluate a Spillane or even a UG3, although I think that guy has to show out eventually, because, people keep talking about how great of an athlete he is, but he really hasn't done a whole heck of a lot up to this point. He's been hurt a lot, and maybe there was a reason why he was a 6th-round pick. So, but the one of the defenders I want to really talk about, I'm excited about, like a lot of other people, is Alex Highsmith. I couldn't wait to see this guy in action because I wanted to see how far he came in his second year. It's still obviously incredibly early at this point, but we heard so many great things about him in training camp, about how he was relentless and the last one off the field. And, we read the stories about how he changed his body in the off season. He added muscle and lost fat, and he looked a little bit different. So I was anxious to see him in action. I was not disappointed. I mean, I wasn't like blown away, but he recorded a sack on a great spin move. He had a couple of pressures, a couple tackles for loss. And yes, he was going up against second and third stringers, right? That's no question about that. But, he's projected to be a starter in 2021, and you want to see a guy like that dominate against quote unquote lesser competition. And that's what basically defined his college career. He was a walk-on at Charlotte, which is never going to be a school that's known for as a juggernaut, as a powerhouse. And he walked on and eventually became an All-American, and he just dominated everybody that went up against him. He played against Clemson, and the opposing coach did nothing but talk about him, how they had to account for him. So you want to see a player like that dominate lesser competition. And I think we saw that with Highsmith. And I'm really, really, the more I think about this guy and the more I read about him, and I think I'm not saying he's going to be at Bud Dupree's level 2019, 2020 just yet, but I think he's going to be a really, really good player for them sooner than maybe we even realized. And I think starting in 2021, he's going to really be a good defender for them. So on that note, I will close out the first half of the show at the 22:37 mark. I always say that to remind myself so I can remind Brian, so we know where we're at in the show for editing purposes. But if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, please don't go anywhere. I'm going to be right back. And if you're listening on the audio platform after the fact, I thank you for listening to part 1. But please come back and download part 2 of this episode of Steelers Friday Night 6-Pack. And welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of this episode of Steelers Friday Night 6-Pack. If you're watching me live on YouTube or Facebook, thank you for sticking with me. If you downloaded part 2, thank you for that too. And thank you for all the people who stuck with me in the live chat. We have a big house tonight. This is great. People want to talk about that game, I think. And let's see, Mark Tobin is in here. Russ Obenstein, a couple of legends, they joined us as I was rambling on and on in the first half. And Russ says, Lane and Samuels, meaning Justin Lane and Jalen Samuels, need to be cut. Well, certainly wasn't a spectacular night for Justin Lane. I think he recovered a fumble, right? But otherwise, he didn't really look great. Samuels, he 20 yards and 11 carries, I think, or 13 carries. Wasn't a great night. I don't know if they're not going to be cut right away, but they certainly didn't do much to change opinions about what people think of their play coming into the season. A lot of people were kind of iffy about Samuels, and same with Lane coming into his third year. So they didn't do much on Thursday to change minds. But I thought, James Pierre looked pretty good. Not great, but, I think for his first preseason action, he looked decent enough. I think he had a couple of pass breakups. He gave up a couple of plays, but he's a young corner, so that's going to happen. You can't judge a player on a few. You can't solely judge a player on 5 or 6 plays in a preseason game. You have to take into account what they're doing in the preseason, or in training camp. That factors in more than we think. Even though I think the preseason weighs in heavily, I think training camp weighs in more than we think it does. So I feel like Pierre looked pretty good. Mark Gilbert looked okay. So people were talking about Jameer Jones. He looked really good. Buddy Johnson, I think when he got in there, as far as he didn't put up a lot of stats, but as far as inside linebacker play, and again, you have to take it with a grain of salt. It was late in the game with a lot of third, fourth stringers, but I thought he looked pretty active. I was really excited about to see Quincy Roche get a sack because he dominated at Temple. He really did dominate, 26.5 sacks at Temple. He was an all-conference player there, defensive player of the year. And then he did pretty well in Miami in his senior year. So I was anxious to see how he would do against competition that would be equal or lower in terms of, at least in terms of draft pedigree. So that was nice to see him get that sack. And before I continue, I have a super chat that I missed, or I'm just coming up on a $5 super chat. Let's see who was that by. I gotta find those. Very important. Very important. Here we are. Thanks, Mean Joe, and Thanks, Mean Joe just puts in $5. Well, that is fantastic. I no comment or anything. I appreciate the $5. Thanks, Mean Joe. And as far as I'm concerned, you're up there with number 75 in terms of all-time great super chat donators. A $5 with no comment attached to it. Not that we don't like comments, we love them, but that's really, really selfless. So, wow. You remember Mean Joe, as dominant as he was, he took up a lot of blocks for people like L.C. Greenwood and Dwight White and Ernie Holmes and John Banaszak. He did a lot of that heavy lifting so they could get some glory. So that's what you're doing. You're giving us $5 and not even wanting us to read a comment for it. So that's really appreciated. Russ Obenstein says, I did make it to 4 training camps and can easily tell Canada is not showing very little of what I saw in training camp. Yeah, well, that's kind of my point. And you really backed that up nicely, Russ. It was such a vanilla offense. It's hard to evaluate backup quarterbacks based on a preseason game. So it's hard to tell like where Mason Rudolph is. But I will say this about training camp: is you're coming into the preseason game, you were hearing more great things about Haskins than you were about Rudolph as far as what he was doing in practice. So maybe that's something we should pay attention to over these next few weeks of training camp. Is if he continues to make news as far as his performance at Heinz Field, then that might be an indicator of what they're thinking of him and where he might wind up on the depth chart at the final cutdown day. So that's a good observation, Russ. I want to touch on a few more players from Thursday's game. Obviously, Presley Harvin was fantastic in his debut. He punted the whole game, 45.8 yards per punt. He had a few down inside the 20, including one. He might never have a better punt in his whole career, ironically enough, than the one he downed inside the 1. There were like 3 players downing the ball, and I thought for sure one of them was going to step on the goal line and turn it into a touchback. Not that it would have mattered because it was still going to, it wouldn't have taken away what he did as far as that punt. It was like it just basically died at the 1. It was perfect. So he certainly did a lot for himself and lived up to the hype and what people were expecting of him as far as his ability to pry that job away from Jordan Berry once and for all. I mean, not that it's a done deal. Jordan Berry didn't get a chance to defend himself as far as of punting on Thursday, but Harvin really looked great. So if he can continue to punt like that, there's no way he's not gonna. Excuse me, he's not gonna win that job. So congrats to him. Now, just want to talk about another thing. It was a kind of a shocker on Friday, and that was the news reported by Adam Schefter. It's not really news; it's kind of a rumor that, according to some source that he has, and he's Adam Schefter for a reason. His sources are usually pretty reliable. James Washington, the Steelers' fourth-year receiver, has requested a trade, and the reason being is a decline in playing time. And I mean, I can see his point. If it is true, if the rumor is true that he has requested a trade, I can certainly understand his frustration. I think if you put yourself in his shoes, if we've all been in that situation at work or some other area of our lives that are important to us, and maybe you feel like you're being held back, and you feel like you can do more, and you feel like if you just got a chance, you would really be able to show out and basically advance your career, get promoted or make more money. So I can definitely see where Washington's coming from, because when he has had the opportunities, with the exception of his rookie year, which was a disaster, there's no question about it. I mean, he didn't really do a whole heck of a lot. But in his limited time chances since then, he's done really well. I mean, look what he did in 2019 when he led the team in receiving yards, catching passes from Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph all year. So that was, I mean, to me, that showed me a lot, his 2019 season. But, they drafted Chase Claypool last year, and Deontay Johnson factored heavily into their offense right from day one. And of course, Juju. So his chances were going to be limited last year. Nobody knew how much, because I don't think anybody realized how. I mean, people were hopeful, but I don't think people realized how great Chase Claypool would be in his rookie year, at least how very good he would be. But I think we all assumed that Smith-Schuster would leave as a free agent, and then Washington would get his chance, and he probably thought that too. And he was probably as shocked as anybody when Juju re-signed here for that one-year deal shortly after free agency kicked off in March. So that essentially put Washington back as the number 4 guy. He's the odd man out, or I guess the even man out, however you want to say it, as the fourth receiver. But I'm going to be interested to see how the fans ultimately respond to this. So far, it's been really supportive. From what I've read and heard, people understand his situation. First of all, he's just a quiet, humble, hardworking guy. So he's an easy guy to like if you're a fan. So that's probably one of the reasons why people are kind of seeing his side of things. If he was on Twitter saying, trade me or cut me, I want to, and people might have a different opinion. But so far, so good as far as the fan support. But I think people are also, what I don't get from this is people are just saying, okay, he said he wants traded. Well, what can they get for him? They need to try to get something for him now. Like, no, they don't. They don't need to honor his wishes at all. And I'm not, again, I understand his frustrations, but you know how NFL seasons unfold. I mean, 1 minute you're the number 4 guy on the depth chart. Next thing you know, you're starting because of a rash of injuries. If you remember the 2016 season, by the time the playoffs rolled around, they had Antonio Brown and really nobody of any repute, if that's the right word I'm looking for, nobody of significance behind him. Sammy Coates was hurt. I think Darius Hayward-Bay was hurt. They had Kobe Hamilton as one of the starters heading into the playoffs, I think. So, it can change pretty quickly. So if I'm the Steelers, unless he's really causing a lot, like a lot of trouble, which he doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would do that at all. There's no indication in that he would be that kind of a player that would cause a distraction like that, if you want to call it a distraction. I don't really think of it as a distraction, but a lot of people do when players are vocal. I would say, look, James, we might need you. We're going to do everything we can to make you a part of the offense. But even if that doesn't happen, we might need you at some point, and we need you to stay ready. We need you to keep working. We need you to stay focused, because you never know. And besides that, maybe they already, in their minds, they already have Juju out the door next year, because they know that the salary cap's going to increase next year, and he's probably going to want the kind of, we know he's going to want that kind of deal that, that's talking about Juju, that's befitting a number one type receiver. Whether you think he's number one, number two, he's probably going to command a big raise next year, probably double what he's making this year, which is about $8 million. They might have plans for Washington next year. I said this on Twitter the other day. He might be their Cam Sutton, the guy that gets a raise, maybe not the kind of raise that Juju gets, but or that Mike Hilton got, but a raise and a promotion as far as how he's going to factor into the offense next year. Because, if Juju leaves and you trade James Washington, now you're down, you're the deepest receiver in the NFL thing is down to two receivers, and who knows after that. You could talk about Rico Bussey all you want, and he's still unproven. I remember when Justin Brown, people were excited about him. Remember him, the receiver from, I think it was Penn State, and he made the team, but he didn't do anything. So, I wouldn't, just because he's asking for a trade, I wouldn't trade him. People are always like, people are saying, can you get a 4th or a 5th round pick for him? What can you get for him? I don't care about the 5th round pick from 2022 right now. I'm worried about the 2021 Pittsburgh Steelers and their prospects. And one of the things that makes them so special on offense, or can potentially make them special, is the fact that they're 4 deep at receiver. They have 4 receivers who all can wreak havoc if given the chance. And I don't want to get rid of one of those guys just because he's unhappy with his playing time, just to get a 5th round pick for next year. Who cares? I mean, they hand those compensatory picks out like Tic Tacs every year. So if you don't get a 4th or 5th round pick for Washington, you might get one just because next year. So no, I'm not getting rid of James Washington. I'm keeping him around. Again, I'm going to do whatever I can if I'm Matt Canada or Mike Tomlin to make him happy, get him to factor into the offense, but I'm not getting rid of him. No way. I'm not doing it. Sorry. I'm worried about 2021, and I could care less about next year's draft class and making up for that 5th round or 4th round pick or whatever it was they traded to get Loudermilk in this past draft. I could care less. That's next year's problem. You got to worry about putting the best team on the field for 2021. And as far as I'm concerned, that includes James Washington as your number 4 receiver. So, because you never know who's going to be number 2, right? It can happen just like that in the NFL. We see it all the time. One position gets totally ravaged by injuries. And next thing you know, you're signing guys off the street. Well, if you keep James Washington on the roster, you don't have to do that. Maybe you have to sign somebody off the street or off the practice squad, but he's not going to factor into your game plan because you have James Washington who's been in the system for 4 years now, and who's shown you he has the ability to be a big time playmaker, at least in spurts. So you have him on your roster. He's a former 2nd round pick. So I'm like, sorry, James, but you'll get your shot next year in free agency if we can't re-sign you. But we're not just going to give you away just because you're unhappy. So, and I think he's got the right mindset from what I've seen of the guy over the last 4 years. Again, he's a hard worker. He's a respectful guy. He's a quiet guy. He's not going to cause a problem. He might get mad. He might, not be the happiest guy in the world in 2021, but he's not going to be a toxic, quote unquote, toxic member of that locker room. He's not going to be a cancer. That's just not who this guy is from outward appearances anyway. So that's my opinion on James Washington. Just because somebody, and I find that funny, that's where people go immediately. The second somebody says, I want to be traded, they go right to what can I get for him? What can I get for him? Instead of saying, well, they don't have to trade him. Just because he asked for a trade doesn't mean they have to trade him. They can still keep him on the roster, and I think that's more beneficial to them than a 5th round pick in next year's draft. So those are my thoughts on James Washington, and I will take some questions and comments to round out the show. And we'll start with Mark Tobin, who said a while back, Pierre, meaning James Pierre, never got burned, so I'll take that. There you go. That's a good point. He didn't get burned. He didn't look lost. He didn't look great, but he didn't look horrible either. He had flashes. So I think he'll take that for his first extensive game day action. And Thanks Mean Joe asked, maybe rhetorically, how much faith can you put into one preseason game? And if it's a rhetorical question, you probably already know the answer, but I'll answer it for you, and that is not much. It's just one game, and even the dress rehearsal games are not like they used to be. What does Ben play now? Like 3 series, if that. Same with the rest of the starters. They're not in there for very long, even in the next to last game. So, I think it's important to see what these guys, a lot of these younger guys can do, because you know what Ben can do, you know what TJ Watt can do, you know what Cam can do. I mean, they're not going to prove anything in the preseason. It doesn't mean you don't want them to play a little bit. Of course, you want them to play and knock some of the rust off, but they're doing that in practice too. Maybe not as much as they did in the 80s when players went at it, 2-a-days for 6 straight weeks, but they're still getting their feet wet and getting used to contact again. And you're hearing stories out of camp of these scrums taking place, like with Kendrick Green and Cam Hayward and those guys going at it, which it's great. And we know Cam is going to come to play every day, preseason, training camp, or regular season. He's going to be in your face all the time. So it was nice to see a young player like Kendrick Green not backing down, because he came into the league with a reputation of being aggressive, and you saw that when he found out he was drafted, the intensity he showed him and his family that night in his living room. So it was nice to see and hear about Green mixing it up with these veteran guys who, maybe another guy would be intimidated by a Cam Hayward. I mean, you probably grew up watching this guy, and now he's scrimmaging against him in training camp. So, these guys, just because they don't play in the preseason a lot doesn't mean they're not, again, putting in the work in training camp. So not much, to quote Mark Tobin. Let's see, what's this from Russ? And he says, I noticed they introduced a new call called holding. More call last night than we had in 10 games last year. I don't remember. There weren't many penalties last night. I think they only had 3 penalties, unless you're talking about the Cowboys. And Steeler Chick 46 says Eagles are seen as early landing spot for Washington, but that's only if the Steelers want to trade him. And again, unless he's causing a lot of noise, which I get, he doesn't seem like the type that would do that. Why would you want to trade James Washington? Why? Just because you can get a mid-round pick for him? I mean, what's more valuable? What he could possibly do for them in 2021 as far as winning games, or getting a 5th-round pick or a 4th-round pick in 2022? I mean, to me, you got to worry about 2021 first. You got to do what's best for now, and then you worry about 2022 then. Like 5th-round picks, like that's like the draft pick stuff. I know a lot of people get excited about that. Believe me, I know. People fight over, 5th-round picks 2 years down the road if they trade one of those away. So I get it, but I don't care. I just don't care, because a lot of things can happen between now and 2020, the 2022 NFL draft. namely a big playoff run by the Steelers. And to me, that's more exciting than the draft. So they can worry about that next year. I'm keeping James Washington on the roster. Again, provided he doesn't turn into like AB Junior, which I can't see that in a million years happening. And Brandon Lee asks, anyone know how long training camp practices are? You mean as far as a single practice, the duration? I want to say they're 2 hours. I think they're 2 hours. As far as how long they're open until to the public, I think they're open until the 18th. I think their last open practice is the 18th of August, and then that's it. And then it's on to finishing out training camp. I think they break camp by that point, although I guess you don't really do that now if you're at Heinz Field. But certainly you start getting into regular season mode, meaning dwindling or whittling down your roster and playing out the rest of the preseason, and then getting ready for the Bills on September 9th. And Paul Scherf says of James Washington, I knew this would be a popular subject. He says, James Washington is a known value player. I can see him bringing a nice compensation to the Steelers. There are a number of teams where he would be their number 2. Well, it all depends on what you mean by compensation. If you mean a second-round pick, something like that, I mean, that would be value, but it's not going to happen. Nobody's going to give up a second-round pick for a player that's in the final year of his rookie deal. It's just not going to happen, especially somebody who, I've just touted his abilities. I think he has a tremendous amount of ability, but he doesn't have the overall resume other than 2019 to back that up. He doesn't have the stats to back it up. He just has that what he did in 2019 mainly, as far as the kind of player he can be. But if you're talking about a 4th or 5th round pick, to me that's not great compensation. At least when you weigh it against what he could be for this team in 2021. To me, I think people, and I talked about this before. People, sometimes you just have to let a guy leave as a free agent and get nothing for him. You just have to let that happen every now and then. I mean, that's what the draft is for. It's for replenishing those guys that leave. It's just the way of life. Sometimes you just have to let a player play out his rookie deal or whatever, his second or third contract, whatever he's on. And if he decides to leave, he decides to leave. And if you get nothing back for him, that's just how it goes. Because you have to do all you can to win with that player while he's here. And then to me, that's what he's here for, is to help you win games, not, not to be flipped as an asset for draft picks or something, so. Let's see what else we have here. And Jason Durden echoes some sentiments I shared earlier. He says, God forbid there's a wide receiver injury and he's gone. Exactly. We saw what happened back in 2014 at the running back position. They cut LeGarrette Blount because he walked off the field early. He was disgruntled, and there really wasn't a true backup behind him, behind Le'Veon Bell, I mean. And they were screwed for the playoffs. I mean, Bell was hurt the 4th quarter of the final regular season game when they were going for a division championship, and they were screwed. He was their whole offense that year. He was their whole everything, especially down the stretch. The entire, he was essentially their entire workload, and they didn't have him around for the playoffs, and it made all the difference in the world. They had nothing. They had no answers for the Ravens in that wild card game. So, yeah. I'll say it one more time. Unless Washington just causes a major ruckus, I would keep him, because keeping him versus getting a 5th round pick or even a 4th round pick next year, to me, him being here is way more valuable than him netting you a mid-round draft pick for next spring. So, what's up, Just Me? I see Just Me's in the live chat, so welcome, Just Me. Even though I'm getting ready to sign off, I'm not gonna lie. All right. All right. What else we have here? Before I sign off, let's scroll down to the bottom. And Russ says, I was glad they got Naji out of there. Micah Parsons, he's the former linebacker from Penn State. Really good prospect, I think. I'm really impressed by him. He looked great. He was all over the field. Yeah, he was. He was a beast. There was a reason why a lot of people are really excited about him, maybe possibly falling to the Steelers, because I think he's going to be a difference maker in the middle of that defense. Trying to think of who else. Another thing I want to talk about before I sign off, like Matthew Sexton. This is like the stock people put in preseason games. He's a receiver. He had a big punt return last night, 36-yard punt return. And now people are saying he's going to push Ray McLeod for that punt return role. And I say to that, slow your roll, because I think Ray McLeod did a ton last year to win that job. I mean, you saw the difference he made as a punt returner in a couple of games. And he factored into Canada's, when Canada still had a influence in the offense early in the year, they kind of tried to utilize him. I realize it's going to be hard to with all the weapons they have, it's going to be kind of hard to utilize a player like McLeod in the offense. But my point is, I don't think you could put too much stock in one return. And I realize we had a long off season, and people want to have these hard takes about the first game. But I think Ray McLeod, Sexton would have to have one whale of a preseason as far as returning kicks and punts in order to pry that job away from Ray. I think he's established as that guy. Never say never, but I would be shocked if that one return alone made Ray McLeod have a sleepless night and have some sleepless nights moving forward. I think his job is still safe as the primary punt returner for the Steelers. Having said that, though, I mean, Sexton, if you're a young, unproven player like that, an undrafted player, you want to make a name for yourself, and he certainly did that. So it doesn't mean they can't keep both of them as far as special teams. If he shows out in other areas of special teams, you never know. I mean, it's all he can do is put on a good show for the coaches and let the chips fall where they may. And if he doesn't catch on here, I mean, there's always teams. Other teams are watching. So good luck to Matthew Sexton, but I don't think he's suddenly a favorite to steal Ray's job just yet. So we'll have to give that more time. And on that note, I will bid you all adieu. And I thank you for sticking with me. I thank you for the $5 super chat donation. Thanks, Mean Joe. Thank you for that. And it was a fun night, and I'm glad we got to watch some Steelers football for the first time in over 6 months, 7 months almost, on Thursday. And the next game coming up is next Thursday against the Eagles in Philadelphia. So we'll have some more stuff to talk about next Friday. And we'll have this game to talk about on the Hangover on Monday with Brian and Shannon White. So I'll talk to you guys then. But in the meantime, please keep checking back to Behind Steel Curtain, the website, for more news and everything else, and commentary, film breakdown. Check out our other podcasts. We have so many. You can find them anywhere, on YouTube, on Facebook, and on any audio platform. So we appreciate your support. I think it's the best Steelers site on the internet, And it's certainly the hardest working. I know that much. I mean, these guys are tireless in the content that they bring you. So please check us out. But until I talk to you again, you guys have a great weekend and go Steelers.